The former president of France, Nicolas Sarkozy, has arrived at La Santé prison in Paris, where he'll serve a 5-year sentence for conspiring to raise election funds from Libya.
Nicolas Sarkozy has begun serving a 5-year prison sentence after a Paris court found him guilty of criminal conspiracy in connection with alleged illegal financing of his 2007 presidential campaign by the Libyan regime of Muammar Gaddafi. The ruling, delivered in late September 2025 and executed in October 2025, is unprecedented in modern French politics. While other former leaders have faced convictions, none had actually been jailed for offenses tied so directly to their ascent to the presidency. The court concluded that Sarkozy knowingly worked with others to plan or facilitate the solicitation of funds from a foreign power, undermining confidence in France's electoral integrity. Although judges did not determine that the full amount of the alleged funds was conclusively delivered, they ruled that the conspiracy to seek and conceal such support was proven beyond reasonable doubt and described the conduct as of exceptional seriousness. To understand the case, it helps to recall the political and diplomatic environment of the mid-2000s. As Interior Minister, Sarkozy built a reputation as a forceful reformer, poised to reshape France's domestic and international posture. His 2007 campaign was ambitious and, by most accounts, expensive within the limits of France's strict campaign finance rules. At the same time, Libya was attempting to re-enter the international mainstream after years of isolation tied to terrorism allegations and weapons programs. Gaddafi's government had begun compensating victims of past attacks, scaling back sensitive programs, and courting Western governments and companies. This thaw opened contacts at senior levels between Tripoli and European capitals, including Paris. Investigations later uncovered documents and testimonies suggesting that Libyan officials discussed funding Sarkozy's 2007 run. Figures circulating in press and judicial filings referenced tens of millions of euros, though the exact sums remain disputed. Among the most cited items were notes attributed to Libya's former oil minister, Shukri Ghanem, mentioning payments in the context of the French election, and statements by the Franco-Lebanese businessman Ziad Taqiyuddin, who said he ferried several suitcases containing a total of about 5 million euros in cash from Tripoli to Paris for delivery to Sarkozy's circle. Although Taqiyuddin later retracted parts of his account, investigators cross-checked his claims with other testimonies, phone records, and fragments of Libyan paperwork that survived the upheavals of 2011. These materials formed part of a broader evidentiary mosaic considered by the court. The optics of Franco-Libyan rapprochement were on full display soon after Sarkozy's victory. In December 2007, Gaddafi made a high-profile 5-day visit to Paris, his first in decades. He received full honors, pitched a Bedouin tent near the Élysée, and presided over the signing of large trade and defense agreements. For Libya, the visit signaled renewed legitimacy. For France, it promised economic opportunities and possible cooperation on migration and security. Beneath the pageantry, however, the alleged financial discussions continued to shadow the relationship. Journalists and opposition figures raised questions, and intelligence services reportedly tracked the chatter about covert funding. The relationship shifted dramatically during the 2011 Arab Spring. As protests spread in Libya and the regime responded with force, Sarkozy's government moved quickly to support international intervention. France played a leading role in securing a United Nations mandate and in the NATO-led air campaign that targeted Gaddafi's military infrastructure. The operation was publicly framed as a humanitarian intervention to protect civilians and uphold international norms. Its outcome reshaped Libya and the region. Gaddafi was killed in October 2011, the Libyan state fractured, and weapons proliferated across the Sahel, fueling insecurity from Mali to Niger and Burkina Faso. In the years that followed, Gaddafi's son, Saif al-Islam, publicly alleged that Libya had financed Sarkozy's 2007 campaign and claimed to hold corroborating details. While those assertions were controversial, they became part of the investigative record French magistrates examined during the long inquiry. French prosecutors opened a formal probe in 2013, following media revelations that included purported Libyan documents. Over the next decade, investigating judges interviewed aides, intermediaries, and former officials, reviewed bank and phone records, and tried to reconstruct the paths by which money could have moved. The inquiry was complicated by the collapse of Libyan institutions, contested witness credibility, and the inherent difficulty of tracing cash transactions. Nevertheless, by the time the case went to trial in early 2025, the prosecution alleged a pattern of coordinated efforts to solicit foreign funds in violation of French law, which strictly prohibits candidates from receiving contributions from foreign states or agents. Sarkozy denied the charges throughout. He argued that no foreign money entered his campaign accounts and said that key testimonies were inconsistent or politically motivated. His defense emphasized that some witnesses had changed or retracted statements and that not all documentary fragments could be authenticated to judicial standards. Prosecutors countered that conspiracy under French law can be established by demonstrating planning and coordination toward an illegal objective, even if the full financial flows are not recovered or traced to a candidate's official accounting. The court ultimately convicted Sarkozy of criminal conspiracy while acquitting him of certain other counts. It imposed a 5-year prison term, a fine of €100,000, and a 5-year ban from public office. The judgment stressed that the acts corroded public trust by blurring the boundary between national decision-making and foreign influence. Sarkozy appealed the verdict, but the sentence began to be carried out in October 2025. The decision is significant for the French legal and political system. It demonstrates that even the highest officials can face custodial sentences when found to have undermined the integrity of elections. Previous high-profile cases, such as the conviction of former President Jacques Chirac, resulted in suspended sentences. In contrast, the enforcement of a prison term against Sarkozy marks a tougher posture by courts on campaign finance violations, particularly where foreign involvement is alleged. The case also underscores the weight French law places on safeguarding sovereignty in electoral processes. Foreign state funds, whether direct or channeled through intermediaries, are forbidden because they risk distorting democratic competition and creating dependencies incompatible with independent governance. The ruling's resonance extends into the international arena, especially given the central role of Libya in the allegations and the geopolitical consequences of the 2011 intervention. While the court did not adjudicate the motives behind French foreign policy in Libya, the trial placed earlier diplomatic and military choices under renewed scrutiny. Analysts and historians will likely continue to examine whether prior political relationships influenced subsequent policy decisions, and to what extent, if any, those relationships intersected with electoral finance. Regardless of those debates, the legal outcome rests on a narrower foundation. The finding that a coordinated attempt to seek foreign funding for a French presidential campaign occurred, even if the precise amounts and end recipients remain incompletely documented. The case has prompted broader reflections on France's historical ties with African states. For decades, economic interests, security cooperation, and political networks have shaped interactions between Paris and partners across the continent. The allegations of Libyan money intersect with that legacy, highlighting how financial and political channels can overlap in ways that challenge transparency. The judicial process, by contrast, emphasized documentary evidence, corroborated testimonies, and the statutory framework governing elections. In doing so, it separated political narrative from legal standard and focused on whether the elements of conspiracy were established beyond reasonable doubt. Domestic reactions in France have been mixed, but generally acknowledge the gravity of the moment. Legal commentators view the conviction as a milestone for judicial independence and a cautionary signal to political actors. Others worry about the erosion of public confidence that accompanies revelations of wrongdoing at the highest levels. Internationally, the ruling has fed into growing scrutiny of foreign financing in democratic politics, a topic of rising concern in Europe and elsewhere as cross-border flows of money and influence become harder to monitor. The Sarkozy case illustrates how such issues can surface long after an election and how investigative journalism, judicial persistence, and protected testimony can eventually yield courtroom outcomes. Sarkozy's appeal will proceed through the French system, and outcomes could affect details of the sentence or the legal reasoning. Appeals in complex financial and political cases often involve close examination of evidentiary standards, chain of custody issues for documents, and the treatment of witness statements that changed over time. However, the immediate practical consequence is clear. The former president is serving a custodial sentence while contesting the judgment, and the conviction currently stands as a landmark in France's enforcement of campaign finance law. For observers in Africa and Europe alike, the affair encapsulates several themes. It demonstrates how political relationships formed in moments of diplomatic rapprochement can have long-after lives in courts and archives. It shows how conflicts and regime changes can scatter or expose records that later become evidence. It highlights how democratic systems seek to insulate elections from external financing, not only to prevent quid pro quo arrangements, but also to maintain public confidence in the neutrality of national policy. And it underscores that accountability can be delayed but still realized, even when the central events occurred nearly 2 decades earlier. The Sarkozy judgment does not resolve the larger historical debates about Libya or the long-term effects of the 2011 intervention, nor does it quantify with certainty the sums allegedly promised or delivered. It does, however, establish that a French court, after years of inquiry, found a criminal conspiracy to solicit and conceal foreign funds for a presidential campaign. That finding alone places the case among the most consequential legal decisions in the Fifth Republic's history. It closes one chapter in the intersection of French politics and North African affairs, while inevitably opening others as historians, legal scholars, and the public continue to examine how power, money, and foreign policy intersected in one of the defining episodes of the early 21st century.